Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the midweek blessing. We always need a blessing, but it's the middle of the week right now, so here we are. Really glad to hear. I am live tonight. It is 8 o'clock here in Central Time, 6 o'clock back on the West Coast where I used to live, and a good chunk of my heart still is. But it's dark outside, and we're live, and I'm gonna usually be live here at this time, but next week, which would be the 19th. The math was like, on the 19th, my peer church has its board meeting on Wednesdays, so I'll pre-record it next week. But when that's not going on, I will usually be live here. And whether you can make it here at this time or not, I know in our schedules today, watching YouTube at a particular time or television at a particular time isn't always where we're at, and this stays up. You can see it any time. Blessings are there to be grabbed at any point, and so is the midweek blessing. But I'm glad to be here. I feel like in the coming weeks I'm probably going to have a lot of weather reports. I just have a feeling. For those of you that might have been watching us here for a little while, do you remember when we started this? Cindy and I would be out in the park on a Friday evening, bringing in Sabbath, sun setting, a nice balmy 95 degrees. That's 35 degrees in modern degreeness in Europe. Little rustle of a light breeze in the trees. That's not here today. It's actually not that cold, according to my phone. According to me, it's a little chilly, but it really is windy out there today, and it feels like a hot chocolate slippers kind of day. But I'm here in our basement, and where the camera is, where the lights are, where the microphone is, all the switches are. In fact, the switcher here it usually gets pretty warm. I'm getting more and more grateful for that. but there's something about, even though, I'm sitting here facing a camera, I feel like I get to chat with you right now and just remind us that God is constantly with us, that even though this world is pretty messed up, and tonight in our Bible study, we're going to see examples of how incredibly messed up this is. It's something I'm calling truth or Barabbas. Those of you who've been around Scripture for a while might be getting what I'm trying to say, and we'll finish John chapter 18 tonight. This week, I got to do something a little bit different. I went up to Bismarck in North Dakota. I'm in Pierre, down at the bottom there. Bowdle's almost halfway up, and then Bismarck is where our conference office is. And I got to go up there and spend some time with 11 of the pastors here in the conference, and some of the people, the conference president, some of the people up there. I had a good time. It was really nice getting to know my colleagues a little bit more. I really enjoyed that. But I'm home now in time for the midweek blessing, and to get ready for Sabbath here, which will be communion up in Bowdle. Had our first communion here in Pierre. Sounds like I'm of a different faith, and I just turned about 12 years old. Had our first communion here in Pierre. It was really nice to do. The ending was really special, and thank you to everybody who made that special. And in our peer church here, we got a pretty special pianist. For a small church, there's some good music here in this church. There's more than one person that can play the piano, which is very nice. And we were certainly blessed at the end of church there. And then on Friday night, I will go up to Battle and practice for our communion up in Bowdle this Sabbath, where Cindy and I will be. All right, I feel like this would be a great time to very briefly, my goal is still to be around 20 minutes, very briefly give a little bit of a recap. John is an eyewitness to Jesus' ministry. He's right there, and this, I think, shows itself quite clearly in the story of the trials in particular, and of course the crucifixion as well. And John is an old man by the time he's writing this. Who knows? Maybe all the other disciples had died in one way or another. And there were a lot of people in the church now who had never met Jesus. And I suspect that was beginning to show, and I have a feeling that's why John wrote this gospel. There are some things that Jesus taught his disciples that John wants us, his disciples today, to know. And if you read John, and as we've gone through John, and it's been about 2 years into this now, there's been some gaps along the way, and some restarts, and some COVID and all that sort of stuff. But John records a lot of conversations Jesus had with the religious leaders. And tonight, well, in the last couple of weeks, and tonight too, it's rough to see religious leaders acting this way. And I just moved my eye over to the chat thing, and Mary Zapata, you're here tonight. It's lovely to see you on here. And I know we don't always connect. Last week, I was not here last week. Things just kind of got ahead of me. Shame on me, really. I should have made it work, but I just thought I'd catch up by not doing this, which is a bit crazy, really. Those of you who know me totally understand that. But I will be trying to do this pretty regularly. And Mary, it's lovely to see you. Lovely to see you on here. Flashbacks. So I think with that, we will move into our scripture for tonight. We're going to be in John chapter 18, and we're going to finish the chapter, which is up to verse 40. But it means we shall start in verse 28. And Jesus has been to Caiaphas. He's been in front of the Sanhedrin. Peter has denied Jesus. John is in the courtyard. He seems to have some connections that got him in there. And so John sees things a little bit different. His memory is a little different than the Synoptic Gospels that probably all used some of the same information. But John's got a slightly different take on it. We get some added information, and of course some things are missed out. So verse 28, then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas, the de facto high priest. He had to give that role up, but he still seemed to hold on to it somehow. And they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. This is Pilate. It was early morning. The Roman courts met from sunrise to sunset. And it seemed that they knocked on Pilate's door perhaps a little earlier than sunrise. There's a lot going on here. First of all, Pilate didn't live in Jerusalem. He lived in Caesarea, which was the Caesarea over by the coast, not the one up at the very north. And to this day, it's a tourist place, lots of restaurants. It's right on the Mediterranean there. It's beautiful. A lot of history there. And that's where Pilate, who history does not treat kindly, everyone goes between a bit of a just non-event person to trying to prove himself, to being a bit of a bully, to being chicken here and there. He's all over the map. I don't think he was a natural leader. And that, I think, comes out here a little bit. But it was Passover time, and that's where all the crowds were. And I suspect there needed to be some crowd control. And so there would have been plenty of soldiers around, and Pilate was there. So they took Jesus to Pilate's house. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters. Why? Because they did not want to be defiled, or what we would call ceremonially unclean. They didn't want to break the law of God in the scriptures because they wanted to eat Passover. Now, I think they had the Passover meal the night before, but there were plenty of other meals and events and feasts to come. And if they were defiled or made unclean, they would have to sit them out for 7 days. So they didn't want to be ceremonially unclean. They didn't want to be defiled, so they wouldn't go into Pilate's house. And yet, they were taking Jesus there on trumped-up charges. The irony is dripping. And to this day, when you try and manufacture events to suit your own personal ambitions, the mess and mental gymnastics we have to do, the contradictory behaviors that have to exist in order to do it, is there for the whole world to see. But we think we can cover it up, and these religious leaders thought they could too. So Pilate went outside to them. I'm sure he loved that. These people coming and asking him a favor and saying, I'm sorry, we can't come into your house because we don't want to defile ourselves, but could you come out here? So I could just see him just rolling his eyes. Okay, what accusation do you bring against this man? To which they were happy to reply. They answered him, if this man was not doing evil, would we have delivered him over to you? So, classic politicians not answering the question. What charges have you got for this man? Well, if we didn't have any charges, do you think we'd bring him? It's like playground stuff. Pilate said to them, well, then take him yourselves and judge him by your own laws. Deal with it as you see fit. But the Jews said to him, it's not lawful for us to put anyone to death. And it wasn't. The Jews could not do that. By their own laws, they would have taken him out of the city. They would have stoned him to death, and that would have been done. But they weren't allowed to do that. The Romans like, only we can do it. And this was a fairly recent introduction to the law, by the way. This had maybe only happened a couple years before this. In fact, at the end of Genesis, it suggests there that the Jews would be in charge of these courts, these decisions, until the time of the Messiah. And now they weren't allowed to, and it turns out that was likely put in place while Jesus was ministering in Galilee and around some of Judea. And so they couldn't put him to death. It's not lawful for us to put anyone to death. Verse 32. This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken to show by what kind of death he was going to die. He didn't die by stoning. He died by crucifixion. It was a Roman execution. It was not a Jewish Sanhedrin Pentateuch execution or punishment or result there at that time. So verse 33, so Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, so Pilate took Jesus inside. Jesus went inside. Think about this. The religious leaders, the Sanhedrin, would not go into Pilate's house because they'd be defiled. But Jesus, the Son of God, according to the law, was now unclean. He would die ceremonially defiled, unclean. Which in his position as Savior, I don't know, it just seems to resonate with me there, mostly with irony. So now Pilate and Jesus are essentially alone. I'm sure there are some attendants around, but the Sanhedrin were not. They were all outside, not going inside. And so Pilate says to Jesus, are you the King of the Jews? Now, I wonder if Pilate knew about Jesus' entry into Jerusalem on a donkey. If Pilate knew that, I doubt he was bothered by it. Here comes this would-be king, on a donkey, if the crowds and the noise got some of the Romans' attention, I suspect the donkey sort of deflated that a little bit. And Jesus answered, do you say this of your own accord, or does others say it to you about me? In other words, Jesus knows that Pilate has been talking to the religious leaders, and here he is sort of spouting off their stuff. By the way, in front of the Sanhedrin and the high priests and the different courtrooms there, they had brought the charge of blasphemy, which by Jewish law was punishable by death. But that was not punishable by death by Roman law. So now they were bringing other charges, like he was rabble-rousing, he was building up the crowd, he was claiming to be king over Caesar. And they were when you have to change the charges, it's a sign that perhaps you're not walking down the right path right now. Pilate answered him, verse 35, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done?" Pilate's like, "I don't deal with your guys' religions and superstitions and all this provincial nonsense stuff. Don't bring me into your games." That's what Pilate is saying. He says to Jesus, "So what have you done?" And Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world." Harking back to Matthew, when Jesus gave the disciples the Lord's Prayer, when he taught them how to pray. "Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." And Jesus is saying, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting. In other words, if my kingdom was of this world, we'd have an army and we'd do it the worldly way, but that's not me. It's not my agenda. It's not why I've come. It's not who I am. But my kingdom, he says, is not of this world. And Jesus made this clear when Peter cut the servant's ear. Jesus is like, no, that's not how we're going to do this. My kingdom is not of this world. A couple more verses. And Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" And Jesus answered, "You say that I'm a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come to this world, to bear witness to the truth." I just imagine Pilate going, woo, a little bit loopy. It's like when someone comes to me as a pastor and they say, "I am the reincarnation of the Son of God," and I do a little Pilate thing. Woo! And just don't sort of expect that. But he says that I come to bear witness to the truth. We debate these days the difference between the relativity of truth, circumstantial, what we experience, against the idea of absolute truth. And sometimes that's a very real debate, because our circumstances do change perceptions and they do change realities. And I think Jesus understands our circumstances and our backgrounds, I mean, to the 10th generation back and beyond. But Jesus came here to show us how to live, how life works, what love really looks like, and love in flesh and bones, how we treat each other, how this community thing works. Jesus is often using the word truth throughout, and John, uses those phrases. And now here he is. I don't know how John heard about this conversation. I don't think he was in Pilate's courtyard. I think he was in Caiaphas's courtyard. But he's reporting it here. Jesus says, "I've come to this world to bear witness to the truth." And Rome being Rome, when you're in trouble with Rome being so powerful, the truth was whatever Rome wanted it to be. And today we've got political parties and people with agendas and even religions and spiritual leaders and people who have their own truth, who try and manufacture truth to suit their agenda and what they need right now. And Jesus said, I haven't come to play those sorts of games. In fact, I've met, the next phrase is, everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. And I've heard people quote this to me. It's like, if you want to know the truth, you will listen to me. And you're not Jesus. I need to listen to Jesus. I need to seek him. I need to understand what he's trying to say. And Pilate said what a lot of us say at this point. He said to him, well, what is truth? I mean, how do we get to find that out? And Jesus said, I've come to show you, I know it's confusing, I know it's messed up, and I know this world has a very tainted view of what truth and reality is, and a lot of stuff breaks down when important moments arise. But Jesus is like, I've come to tell you the truth. Pilate basically dismisses him and is like, well, what? What is the truth? How can we know the truth? But Pilate, being a politician trying to probably go back to bed till the sun comes up, says, but you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So do you want me to release you to the king? Do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews? And he would have said this to the crowd. He's gone back out to the crowd. And he has said to, did I miss a verse there? And what, I feel like I've missed something. No, I think I've got it. Hope I've got it. Kind of, yeah. Oh, I think I've missed a few words there. Anyway, it's not good to take stuff out of the Bible, but I think there's a couple things I should have. You know what? I should have a backup Bible sitting right here. Anyway, Pilate went back out to the crowd. Whoops, let me get that one back up. And says, and you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. And this might have been just Pilate's own custom. It doesn't seem to be a particularly official Roman custom. It just seemed like, I'll do something nice here on your Passover holiday day. So do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews? I imagine Pilate is so nonplussed by this whole entire thing. But these religious leaders who didn't want a trial, they wanted Jesus dead. Back in John 11, they decided this guy's just got to go. It's messing with us and our position and our power and our influence. Just got to get rid of him. And I doubt they would have planned to do it during Passover, except that was God's plan. And that's when Judas came and offered Jesus up. So the crowd cried out, not this man. We want Barabbas. Now, it says here in John that Barabbas was a robber. And in this translation, it's not a good translation. Barabbas was, I'm sure he robbed people and killed people, but he was a terrorist. He was, for the Romans. He was perhaps one of the zealots that Simon was and one of Jesus' disciples. And so after this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, I find no guilt in him. He sees Jesus as an innocent man. He's not a troublemaker. Jesus was a little more than perhaps Pilate saw. But he says, I find no guilt in him. It's not very often here in John that I call on the other Gospels. But at this moment, I'm going to. I think it's Luke. Don't hold me too fast to that. But there's a part where Pilate goes out to the crowd. Maybe this is the part I was missing. It's in a different gospel. Goes out to the crowd, and Barabbas, who would have been in a fort not too far away, wouldn't have heard what Pilate said. Do you want Jesus or do you want Barabbas? And the crowd would have shouted out, we want Barabbas, we want Barabbas. And Barabbas would have heard that. He was close enough to have heard a crowd shout that out. And then Pilate would have said, well, what do you want me to do with this man Jesus? And Barabbas wouldn't have heard that. But the crowd shouts back, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. So all Barabbas would have heard was, we want Barabbas, we want Barabbas. Crucify him, crucify him. But when the jailer comes to get Barabbas, the jailer's like, Jesus is the one going to the cross today. You're free. Which is pretty much the story for all of us. Because while the religious leaders were making nonsense and just speaking out of their own selfish gain, trying to cling on to as much power as they could. God and his Son, Jesus Christ, had a plan to save the world. So while Jesus went to the cross, Barabbas is set free. I'm set free. You are set free. That's our message for tonight. And I'd like to finish now with our blessing and say I'll see you next week. Have a good night. You're looking at this freight train lumbering its way through Pierce, South Dakota, dragging its load behind it. If I go downtown at just the right time, I get to see this. I know that so many of us like our blessings now. I mean, right now. Dear God, give me patience today. But you know, some of our biggest blessings take time. Sure, there's a faster way across the United States for the cargo on this train, but big loads, big blessings take time. So as you look at your life, be patient as your big blessing builds. Notice the work, the big work God is doing in your life. Watch it grow, and at just the right time, or like many trains around the world, maybe just a little bit later than you expected, your blessing, your big blessing will arrive. Good night.